And I was struck yesterday specifically by a post on X that you made, basically with your observations of this war now nearly 3 weeks in, including your suggestion that the options for ending it are now all bad. But I was especially struck with the fact that you years ago convened a group of, and this is, I'm using your words here, security, energy, and economic experts to walk through the scenarios for a U.S.-Iran war and the implications for global oil prices. You said what we're seeing now was considered one of the least likely but worst outcomes. Do you think this administration was prepared for it, and what do they do now?
Yeah, I don't think they were, and thanks for having me. The scenario that we ran looked at kind of small level war, mid-level war, or something really significant. And the conclusion was only when you really threaten the Iranian regime with regime change and really make it existential for them are they going to start doing things like shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. They want a way out of it. They didn't really want a direct fight with the United States because we are much bigger. We are much stronger. At the end of the day, things will be worse off for them than they are for us. But if you push them into a corner and give them no options, this is where they go. And the challenge we have specifically with the Strait of Hormuz is it's a very small area right next to Iran. So it's very easy for them to disrupt it. All they have to do to successfully disrupt shipping is have a small boat go in there every once in a while, drop a mine, fly a UAV in and hit a ship. All you need is a couple of ships to explode, and suddenly nobody is pushing anything through the strait, and you're talking about millions of barrels of oil who aren't getting through. I actually think the one thing about this scenario that nobody really expected is, and one of the other reasons people thought it was unlikely Iran would close the strait is that's how Iran gets all of its oil out. But what's been kind of crazy about this scenario and people didn't anticipate is they're still pushing their oil out. They're just not letting anybody else push their oil through.
That's right. We see that they have, in fact, been doing a little traffic control in the strait. Ilan, the head of the International Maritime Organization, Arsenio Dominguez, was speaking to the Financial Times and said military assistance is not a long-term or sustainable solution to open up the strait. Do you believe that diplomacy is the only way to keep it open, or should our NATO allies be showing up to help us out?
I think at the end of the day, you're going to need a deal. You can have short-term military escorts going through the strait and get more ships in. But the problem is that takes a huge amount of ships to actually be able to do something like that for a sustained period of time. You know, our NATO allies don't have that many ships that are capable of doing that. We don't have that many ships that are capable of doing that because, you know, ships go out for a couple months at a time. On top of that, then they have to transport back home. Then you have to spend time at home. You're already seeing this if you've seen stories about the Ford, which is an aircraft carrier that's going to be at sea for almost a year now, and things are starting to break down. Ships need time at home. And so I think that becomes very expensive very fast when you're also looking at things like a scenario of China and Taiwan and trying to secure the Indo-Pacific, you know? So
it's incredible to see the military presence that we have built up, despite, of course, President Trump suggesting that he didn't want to start any new conflicts in the Middle East specifically. And it was for that reason, perhaps, or at least in part, that the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, handed in his resignation today, saying he cannot support this war in Iran. But his reasoning here, and I'll quote him directly from his post on X, Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Now, Ilan, obviously, we have seen even the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, suggest that it was clear to the U.S. that Israel was going to make a move on Iran and that the U.S. was going to have to participate. I wonder your assessment here of to what extent Israel did force the hand of the United States when President Trump has suggested it was he that forced Israel's.
No, the buck stops with the President of the United States. When the President of the United States puts American troops in harm's way, he is the one who's responsible for that. Netanyahu wanted to conduct strikes on Iran during Biden's presidency, during Obama's presidency, even like the previous Israeli prime minister pushed for it in Bush's presidency, and U.S. presidents said no. And Donald Trump said yes. So I think really the responsibility has to be ultimately on Donald Trump in the United States. And the other thing about this is I actually think specifically Joe Kent's statement in his letter actually started to border on kind of anti-Semitic tropes when he's talking about, the media influence and, Israel tricked Donald Trump into this war and Israel caused the Iraq war. That's some conspiracy levels, theory level stuff. And look, I work for an organization that pushes for a complex, nuanced conversation about Israel. We don't need to just be supporting Israel no matter what blindly. We can have disagreements. We can have real discussions about policy. But for me, Kent went too far, way too far, even if I agree with him on the fact that the war was a bad idea in blaming this on Israelis when really ultimately it's up to the president of the United States.
Interesting. Just lastly, with all of that said, Ilan, we're looking at a massive investment, $21 million that AIPAC has spent in 4 open Illinois congressional races. This is primary day. It looks like AIPAC could see only one of the 4 turning to its favor as it tries to install a group of pro-Israel Democrats in blue seats, in this case in Illinois. How important is that investment, and how concerned will you be if they don't pay off?
Look, the organization I work for, J Street, is pretty much opposed to what AIPAC is doing completely. We are, very much, we are one of the candidates that AIPAC went after. So grandson of Holocaust survivors running in Illinois, who deeply loves Israel, as I do, and is also critical of the Netanyahu government. This is the problem. What AIPAC has done is they have defined pro-Israel as pro-Netanyahu. And it's been very clear from the way Netanyahu has conducted this war in Gaza, the way he has behaved in terms of intervening in American politics, that there's no love for Netanyahu, who's incredibly unpopular among American Jews and among, American voters. And so if definition of supporting Israel is supporting Netanyahu, that's a terrible, narrow definition. That's not where 70% of American Jews are. And that's why J Street exists, to make the alternative case that you can be pro-Israel and critical of Israeli policies, just like you can be pro-America and critical of Donald Trump's policies. Those aren't the same thing.
Yeah.